Hey gamers! Welcome to Treantmonk's Temple. My name is Chris, and this is the place that knowledge is power. And we are here. Ninth level spells. Which are the best? Which are the worst? Which are the most overrated? Which are the most underrated? This is the level of spells where we see a jump in power like we have never seen before. Maybe from second level to third level, the jump was pretty dramatic. And in most campaigns, we actually get to see that jump. Most campaigns, we're never going to get here. But when you do, if you pick well, you will have godlike power. If you pick poorly, you'll feel like another 8th level spell. So, that's why we're doing this list. So let's get started. So I want to get started with our worst spells. And I have an honorable mention to make. So our honorable mention worst spell is Storm of Vengeance. Storm of Vengeance is one of those story advancing spells. It has this just enormous, absurd area of effect that does very, very little throughout it. So this is the spell that your big bad guy is going to come and attack the city with. And the farmers are going to be dying from this. But are you ever going to prepare this spell? Please don't. This is not a spell for a PC. Why they've put it in the player's handbook, I'm not quite sure. Maybe just for a reference for DMs, but maybe they should have had that in the DM guide, because players might accidentally think that this is a decent spell, or that as a 9th level spell it might be decent to take. It certainly sounds good. Storm of Vengeance. It's not. So let's move on. This brings us to our number 3 worst spell at 9th level. My choice for the number 3 worst spell at 9th level is Imprisonment. Because Imprisonment is, this is 9th level, a single target, save, or nothing happens.
Wait a minute. Strike that. Reverse it.
Oh. 9th level spells. We shouldn't be doing these kinds of spells anymore. Yes, this is a save or die. This is a legitimate save or die. You hit somebody with this and they fail their save, they're done. But come on. Single target and they get a saving throw with 9th level. We already can defeat creatures without giving them a saving throw with lower level spells. And now we're going to give them a saving throw? No, don't do it. Single target? Ooh.
There's going to be a lot of garbage today.
That brings us to our second worst spell at 9th level. And there's some similarities, because the second worst spell at 9th level is Power Word Kill. Power Word Kill isn't targeting a save that you don't get a save. Instead, it's one of those spells where you get to guess their hit points. And if you guess wrong, nothing happens. And this time, the hit point is 100 hit points. Your 17th level or higher, 100 hit points is nothing. Nothing. This isn't going to be a spell you want to cast on anything when it's still healthy. You're going to have to beat it till it's almost dead already. And instead of just finishing it off with a weapon, you can finish it off with a 9th level spell. Come on. No. Let's move on. So let's talk about our worst spell at 9th level. And it is so bad. It is so bad that I can compare it to a 3rd level spell. And the 3rd level spell is better. That spell is Weird. Weird is a weird spell. I mean, what we're doing is we're targeting a 30-foot radius sphere, and in that radius, the creatures make a saving throw, and if they fail their saving throw, you know what happens? They're frightened. And if they fail another save at the end of their second turn, they take 4d10 psychic damage, and they're still frightened. If they make that save, they're not frightened anymore. That's how bad this is. Think of the 3rd level spell Fear. With the 3rd level spell Fear, if they fail their saving throw, they're frightened and they have to use their actions to dash away from you. And if they can still see you, they don't get another saving throw. This is worse than that. Yes, it has a better range and a better area of effect. But the actual effect of it is worse than a 3rd level spell. That is unreal. It is mind-blowing. We are at the absolute pinnacle of spell power. And we're going to compare this to a 3rd level spell and struggle to find the areas where it's better. Come on. So that brings us to our best spells. And our best spells, it's going to be a reasonably quick list because these best spells aren't going to be a big surprise to anybody. My number 3 best spell at 9th level is Foresight. Foresight just does good stuff. Gives you 8 hours, no concentration. You can cast it on yourself or somebody else. They have advantage on pretty much everything, and attacks against them get disadvantage. All those things are good. No concentration, best buff in the game. It's good. Let's move on. So that brings us to our second best spell at 9th level. Second best spell at 9th level is True Polymorph. This is the spell that allows you to turn your fighter into an adult gold dragon, complete with 256 hit points, flight, legendary resistance, legendary actions, 12d10 breath weapon, and if it gets tired of being a dragon, the ability to turn into a humanoid. All this, and if you concentrate for an hour, it's permanent until dispelled or until they reach 0 hit points, at which they simply revert back into a fighter. How's that for a buff? Gives Foresight a run for its money. Or turn that tree into a large silver dragon, and during your hour of concentration, that large silver dragon will do whatever you want it to do. Doesn't require your actions or bonus actions, it just does it. Once that concentration is done, it's permanent, though it can now take whatever actions it wants. Or you could turn that dragon into a tree. And then after an hour of concentration, you have firewood for your camp. So, great buff. Summoning. Great debuff. All 3 things bring versatility. It's a great spell overall. So that brings us to our best spell in the game. Everybody knows what the best spell in the game is. It's Wish. Of course it's Wish. Everybody knows this. Wish is the best spell in the game because with a single action verbal component spell, you can emulate any spell in the game of 8th level or lower without any material component, without somatic components. It's just insane. You think you can do resurrections without the diamonds, all that stuff. The versatility of this is unreal, and that alone makes this the best spell in the game. Of course, this spell can do some other things as well. It can create wealth for you. It can bring everyone up to full hit points and give everyone the benefits of a greater restoration and a lot of other things too. But all these other things, you don't want to do them. And the reason you don't want to do them is anytime you do that, there is a reasonable chance, and I mean a 1 in 3 chance, that you can never cast Wish again. And you don't want that to happen. Wish is the best spell in the game. Don't give it up. I can imagine certain circumstance where everyone's almost dead and they're paralyzed and all the rest, that you're going to go ahead and take the chance and get everyone back up to full and restored. Okay, but in general, you're going to avoid those abilities like the plague. Stick to this just being the most versatile spell in the game that avoids all your material components and does amazing things. Unfortunately, only once a day. So that brings us to our most overrated spells at 9th level. What spells could be overrated when they're 9th level spells? Well, the fact is, these are all still really powerful spells, but I think they're overrated, and I'm even going to give an honorable mention this time. My honorable mention is to Gate. Gate is a spell that used to be amazing in previous editions because you could cast it and you could bring forth creatures from other planes that would be compelled to serve you. But the compelled to serve you part is gone now, and that was kind of important. Now it's really just planar travel or pull someone over and negotiate. For a 9th level spell, that is not overly compelling to me, and I'm constantly reminded how good Gate was. And so it makes me want to overrate the spell. Every time I am thinking about 9th level spells, Gate comes to mind, and I remind myself, no, it's not good anymore. So that brings us to our 3rd most overrated spell at 9th level. Again, normally a good spell, but these are 9th level spells. And that spell is Mass Polymorph. The thing is Polymorph isn't a good buff anymore. Now, there are some slight mechanical changes here. We're talking about temporary hit points instead of just replacing hit points. Not necessarily better. So this is not a buff anymore. What this really is it's a 10-person save or be debuffed. And that's okay. I mean, you target 10 creatures. Some are going to fail their save, and then they're polymorphed. But really, it's just a debuff now. It sounds so good, and now it's all right. That brings us to our 2nd most overrated spell in the game, and That's another spell that used to be amazing, and that is Time Stop. If you're playing first edition or second edition, Time Stop is the most powerful spell in the game. And third edition or 3.5, it's in the running. Now, not even close. Not even close. Definitely bottom half. Maybe even a contender for the third worst. But I think it's more overrated than it is bad. It gives you a d4 plus 1 rounds to do some things. But because of the concentration mechanic in 5th edition, you can't do a lot. Yeah, you can raise a wall of force, or you could do a self buff, but once that concentration is used up, there's not a lot more you can do. I mean, you can do things like maybe a fire shield or something, but because of the limits, that means that you cast a 9th level spell for a chance to maybe set up a few smaller spells. Not that great, and not worth a 9th level slot. So that brings us to our number 1 most overrated spell at 9th level. And I had to think about this because it was important to me to include a spell that was good that is also overrated in this list at least. And here's a spell that's reasonably good, but I think it's definitely overrated and it sounds better than it is. And that spell is Invulnerability. You are immune to all damage. That's great. But the drawbacks here are significant. First off, it's self-only. Secondly, it uses your concentration. So you're a primary spellcaster. You've cast this, yeah, you're immune to damage, but now your best spells are unavailable to you. Thirdly, duration is 10 minutes. That's not very long. And fourthly, and this is by far the most important thing, at this level, by this point in the campaign, there are so many things that can happen to you that aren't damage. You can be charmed, you can be dominated, you can be held, you can be paralyzed, you can be stunned, you can be imprisoned, you can be polymorphed, on and on and on. So many ways to take you out, so many ways to bring you out of the action that this spell doesn't stop. That's why this spell is overrated, because it sounds like a spell that's going to make you invulnerable, but you're only invulnerable to damage. You're not actually invulnerable. And that's why this reasonably useful spell is still very overrated. So now let's talk about our underrated spells at 9th level. And coming in at number 3 is Mass Heal. Mass Heal is a in-combat healing spell or an out-of-combat healing spell. And the reason this spell is so much better than all the other healing spells beforehand is because it involves a mechanic that we haven't seen before, and I don't know why. Why don't we have spells with healing pools until now? I've said this in this series over and over again. Damage is not distributed equally amongst the party. It's just not. And that doesn't change as you get to higher levels. The disparity is just bigger. So when you have spells that heal everybody X amount of damage, what ends up happening is the people who need a lot of healing don't get enough, and the people who don't need healing get more than they needed. But with a pool, you distribute it exactly as it's required. Mass Heal allows you to do this. And how big is the pool? It's 700 hit points. Just for reference, a heal spell cast with a 9th level slot heals 100 hit points, compared to a pool of 700 hit points. That's the disparity. That's the power of the 9th level spell. And this spell shows that those 9th level spells really deliver in that regard. I've always said I love in-combat healing when it's effective. This is as effective as it gets. This is worthy of a 9th level slot. This is a good spell. That brings us to our second most underrated spell at 9th level. And my choice for the second most underrated spell at this level, well, my people. Blasts are overrated. Powerful spellcasters shouldn't be casting blast spells. Blasting past level 3 spells is inferior. I fed all this stuff and I take total responsibility because the second most underrated spell at 9th level is Meteor Swarm. Meteor Swarm isn't underrated by a lot of players, but it so happens that a lot of people who follow me do underrate it. In fact, it was predicted for one of the worst spells in this video. It's not one of the worst spells. I have to make an exception for Meteor Swarm because as I see blasts lower in value as we go up in levels, that completely reverses when we hit 9th level and we hit Meteor Swarm. This is a 500-foot range, 40d6 damage, 40-foot radius, and so many dice. This spell brings the power to the blast. This, my friends, is 40 dice. Now, it's not even 40d6. There's 36d6 here, and I have to throw in 4d8s because I don't even have 40d6. This is what it sounds like to roll it. Don't you want that? Not only is this the best blast spell in the game, number 2 is way, way, way down. So that brings us to our most underrated spell at 9th level. And the most underrated spell at 9th level, in my opinion,
The suspense is terrible. He's gonna go this time. I hope it'll last.
is Shape Change. I often hear this spell is worse than True Polymorph. And I would probably agree. True Polymorph is this versatile spell. You use it for buffing, you use it for summoning, you use it for debuffing. Shape Change is a self-only buff. That's what it does. Now let's talk about why it's good. So there are some limitations regarding the forms you can take with this spell. And I think some of those limitations, you read them and it registers in your brain as one thing, but in fact it doesn't have the restrictions you think it does. For example, it says that you can't get legendary actions. That does not mean you don't get legendary resistances. So if you take a creature's form that has legendary resistances, you get them. You get all 3 of them. And if you've just left a form that used all its legendary resistances, you get 3 more. That's like infinite automatic made saving throws. Secondly, you don't get the spellcasting trait. So you think, okay, no spells. But you can get spells. The spells you can get are innate spells. These are the spells that don't have any components. So they're really the spells you want. And there's a huge list of them that you can access. You also get Frightful Presence. So if you take the form that has Frightful Presence, everything must make a saving throw. And those that made their saving throw, well, next round you might change into something else with Frightful Presence. They're going to have to make another one. So as I mentioned, you can change your form with your action. That means by changing your form, you get all those legendary resistances back. You get all the innate spell casting that you've used up. Maybe you used a Raise Dead, and then you want to change forms, and then you change back again. You can Raise Dead again, all without material components. The thing to remember about spells like this in particular is every time there's a new book released, whether it's a Volo's Guide or a Mordenkainen's, every time all those new high challenge rating creatures get released, this spell gets more and more and more powerful. And then of course there's the combat implications. All kinds of creatures have powerful combat abilities. So if you're constantly taking the form of creatures with legendary resistances to ensure that you can maintain your concentration, you can still mix it up in combat. You can do your innate spellcasting to get your spellcasting abilities, your Frightful Presences, your automatic saving throws, and changing every round. Add these things all together, and this becomes a highly useful spell. Maybe not the best 9th level spell in the game, maybe even not top 3, but definitely underrated. And that's it, my friends. That is the end of my series on best, worst, most overrated, most underrated for spells. We're going to be talking about character options next, so stay tuned next week and I will see you then. Until then, I'm going to sit back and relax, and I'm going to have some fun, because D&D's for everyone. Thanks, guys.